You'll still work on it. Nothing changes operationally. This is just paperwork. Those were the words that echoed in my head when I realized they were about to take everything. My boss and his son sat there, waiting for me to hand over 3 years of my life, written in 6 pages of legal language. The water treatment innovation I built from nothing. The system that was already saving the plant hundreds of thousands in disposal fees. About to become the property of a 24-year-old who probably thought filtration was something you did to coffee. But what choice did I have? You either sign when powerful people tell you to sign, or you lose everything you fought to build. Before I go any further, I need to say thank you for being here and listening to what happened to me. If this resonates with you, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me your thoughts. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about what happens when people underestimate the quiet ones. Now, let me tell you how I got to that moment, because it started long before that piece of paper appeared in front of me. My name is Bree, and 5 years before that meeting, I was sleeping on my sister's sofa with 2 engineering degrees and debt that felt like it would bury me alive. I'd sent out 200 applications and gotten 3 interviews. The manufacturing plant hired me to do basic maintenance on their wastewater treatment systems, keep the pumps running, make sure the inspectors stayed happy. Entry-level work that barely covered my rent once I finally moved into my own tiny apartment. But I'm the kind of person who notices things. Details other people walk past every day without seeing. The plant was dumping thousands of gallons of contaminated water daily, paying enormous fees to have it hauled away, while simultaneously buying clean water for the cooling systems and industrial processes. It was backwards, wasteful, expensive. During my lunch breaks, I started sketching out ideas in my notebook. What if we could treat the wastewater to a level where it could be reused internally? Not for drinking, obviously, but for manufacturing operations where ultra-pure water wasn't necessary. I began running small tests after my regular shift ended, adjusting chemical ratios, testing different filtration sequences, using equipment we already had, just in different configurations. 6 months into my experiments, I had something that worked, not perfectly, but well enough to run a pilot program in one section of the plant. The water bills for that section dropped by 18% in the first month. By month 3, it was down 30%. That's when my supervisor noticed. He brought it to the attention of the executive VP, a man named Graydon, who'd been with the company for 22 years and knew every way to squeeze profit from operations. Graydon called me into his office on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I'd never been called to the executive floor before, and I wore the one professional blazer I owned that didn't have a loose button. "This is impressive work," Graydon said, flipping through my documentation. "Really impressive. You've basically created a closed-loop system with equipment we already own. The cost savings potential is massive." I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride, recognition, the sense that maybe I hadn't wasted all that time in graduate school after all. "We need to protect this," he continued. "Patent it, scale it to the whole facility, maybe even license it to other plants." I nodded, already imagining what a promotion might look like. Maybe a title change, a raise, my own project team. Then Graydon said the words that should have warned me what was coming. "My son Kellum just graduated from business school. He's been looking for the right project to cut his teeth on, something with real market potential. He's got the business acumen to really take this to the next level." My pride didn't just deflate. It shattered into something that felt like glass in my chest. Kellum started appearing at my presentations to management. He'd sit in the back, scrolling through his phone, occasionally asking questions that made it obvious he didn't understand the first thing about fluid dynamics or chemical engineering. But he took notes, pages and pages of notes, and slowly, meeting by meeting, he started moving forward in the room, back row, middle row, eventually sitting right next to Graydon, at the head of the table. 4 months after that first meeting with Graydon, Kellum started referring to the project as our system in emails, then the system we developed, then just my system. I told myself it was just corporate politics, that my work would speak for itself, that as long as I kept improving the technology, kept documenting everything, kept making the numbers better, I'd be protected. I was wrong. The meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon. Graydon's assistant called me at 3 p.m. and told me to come to the executive floor immediately. When I walked into the room, Graydon sat on one side of the table, Kellum on the other. Between them sat a stack of papers. "Bree, thanks for coming up," Graydon began. "We're restructuring the intellectual property ownership for the water treatment system. Legal advised us that for tax purposes and liability protection, the IP needs to be held under the correct corporate umbrella." He pushed the papers toward me. I could see intellectual property transfer agreement printed at the top. "You'll still work on it," Graydon added quickly. "Nothing changes operationally. This is just paperwork, administrative stuff." But I'd heard stories. Engineers who signed over their patents and then 6 months later found themselves pushed out. Suddenly their services weren't needed anymore. Suddenly they were causing problems. Suddenly they were let go in budget cuts that somehow didn't affect anyone else. "I'd like some time to review this," I said, trying to keep my voice level. Kellum leaned forward, and I saw that expression again. That smirk that said he'd never had to fight for anything and never would. "There's no time. The patent filing deadline is Monday. If you don't sign today, we miss the window. And if we miss the window," he shrugged, "someone else might beat us to it. Then this whole thing becomes worthless. Along with your position here." The threat hung there between us, unspoken but crystal clear. "Sign this or lose your job. Sign this or lose everything." Graydon's voice came again, quieter this time but somehow harder. "Sign this or you're done. My apartment, my car, the life I'd barely managed to build. It all depended on this job, on staying in Graydon's good graces, on not making waves." So I picked up the pen, but I didn't sign immediately. Instead, I started reading. Every single word, every clause, every subclause. Graydon kept checking his watch. Kellum went back to his phone. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then 40. The language was dense, full of legal terminology designed to confuse non-lawyers. But I'd taken enough technical writing courses to understand how sentences were structured, how meaning was built. And in the third paragraph, I found something interesting. The document read, "Employee hereby grants, assigns, and transfers all rights, title, and interest in the aforementioned intellectual property to the designated recipient, including but not limited to all patents, trade secrets, and derivative works." One word, two. Such a small word, 2 letters, but it determined the entire direction of the transfer. It determined who was giving and who was receiving. I thought about what would happen if I didn't sign. I'd be fired, blackballed, unable to get another engineering job in this industry because Graydon had connections everywhere. I thought about going back to my sister's sofa, about the debt collectors who were finally starting to leave me alone, about starting over at 29 years old with nothing to show for my education, except loans I'd be paying off until I was 50. Then, I thought about Kellum giving speeches about his innovation, about his name on patents for work he'd never done, about him building a career on my ideas while I struggled to find another entry-level position. I pulled out my pen and made one small change. I crossed out "to" and wrote "from" directly above it in neat, clear handwriting. The sentence now read, "Employee hereby grants, assigns, and transfers all rights, title, and interest in the aforementioned intellectual property from the designated recipient, including but not limited to all patents, trade secrets, and derivative works." I initialed the change, just like you're supposed to do with contract modifications. Then I signed at the bottom, dated it, pushed it back toward Graydon. He barely looked at it, just flipped to the signature page, verified my name was there, and filed it in the folder. "Smart move," he said. I walked out of that office with my heart beating so hard I thought my ribs might crack. I'd just changed a legally binding document, but they'd signed it too, both of them. Graydon and Kellum had both added their signatures below mine, making the modified contract official. For 6 weeks, nothing happened. Kellum started doing press interviews. Industry publications ran articles about the young innovator revolutionizing industrial water treatment. He gave a keynote speech at a regional manufacturing conference. He appeared on a podcast about entrepreneurs under 30. In every interview, every speech, every appearance, he talked about his vision and his system and his breakthrough approach. I kept showing up to work. I kept running the systems. I kept my head down and my mouth shut. Other engineers would ask me questions about the technology. Then Kellum would take credit for the answers in meetings. Management started routing technical questions through him. even though he'd then turn around and ask me to actually solve the problems. I watched my creation get stolen piece by piece, and I said nothing. Then, exactly 6 weeks and 2 days after I signed that contract, my phone started ringing. The company's corporate attorney. I didn't answer. She called again and again, 14 times in 1 hour. Each voicemail more urgent than the last. Bree, this is urgent. Call me back immediately. Bree, we need to discuss the IP transfer agreement. Call me back. Bree, there's been a serious legal issue. You need to contact me right now. I didn't call back. The next morning, I arrived at work to find 2 federal marshals in the facility manager's office. They weren't there for me. They were there for the documentation. All of it. Every file related to the water treatment system. Every prototype. Every schematic. Every email. Every technical report. The facility manager looked like he might pass out. On what grounds? He kept asking. Federal investigation into intellectual property fraud, one of the marshals said, loading boxes onto a cart. I stood in the hallway and watched them work. Other engineers gathered around, whispering. Nobody understood what was happening. I did, but I kept my expression neutral, confused, like everyone else. Graydon arrived 30 minutes later, his face red, his tie loosened. He went straight into the manager's office and shut the door. Through the window, I could see him on his phone, pacing back and forth. His free hand kept running through his hair, making it stand up in odd directions. Kellum showed up next, still wearing gym clothes like he'd been pulled from a workout. He tried to go into the office, but the marshals stopped him. I heard one of them say, "Sir, you need to wait outside. Do you know who I am?" Kellum said, his voice rising. "My father is executive VP of this facility. That's my technology they're confiscating." The marshal's expression didn't change. "Sir, wait outside." I went back to my workspace. I had actual work to do, systems to maintain. The water treatment operation didn't stop just because federal agents were boxing up paperwork. I checked flow rates, adjusted chemical feeds, documented pressure readings. Normal day, normal tasks. Except my phone kept buzzing in my pocket. The corporate attorney. I let it go to voicemail every time. By afternoon, word had spread through the entire facility. Federal investigation. Intellectual property fraud. Everyone had theories. Someone said Kellum had stolen designs from a competitor. Someone else said the patents were filed incorrectly. Another person thought it was about environmental violations. Nobody suspected the truth. At 4 p.m., the facility manager sent out an email. All personnel were to continue normal operations. The investigation was unrelated to daily plant activities. Anyone contacted by federal agents or attorneys should immediately report it to Human Resources. I deleted the email. That evening, I went home to my apartment and made dinner like I did every Thursday. Pasta with vegetables. Nothing fancy. I ate while watching a documentary about deep-sea creatures. I did my dishes. I went to bed at 10:30. My phone had 23 missed calls by then. The next morning, Friday, I arrived at work to find Graydon's office empty. His assistant said he'd taken a personal day. First one in 7 years, she added, her voice tinged with worry. Kellum was there, though. I saw him in the hallway outside the legal department, talking intensely with 2 people in suits. Attorneys, probably. His voice carried down the corridor. There has to be a mistake. Run the paperwork again. Check the signatures. Check everything. I walked past without looking at him. I had a meeting with the maintenance crew about upgrading some filtration housings. We spent 2 hours going over specifications and installation timelines. Normal work. Normal Friday. At lunch, I sat in the break room with some of the other engineers. They were still talking about the investigation. I heard they seized everything, one of them said. Every document with Kellum's name on it. Makes sense, another replied. He's been taking credit for work he didn't do. Maybe someone finally reported it. I ate my sandwich and said nothing. Bree, you worked on that water system, someone said to me. Do you know what's going on? I shook my head. No idea. I just keep the equipment running. It was the truth, in a way. I didn't know exactly what was going on in the legal proceedings. I knew what I'd done, but I didn't know how it was playing out in federal offices and attorney conferences. The corporate lawyer finally caught me in person, Friday afternoon. She appeared at my workspace, with a folder under her arm and an expression that somehow managed to be both furious and desperately. Controlled. "We need to talk," she said. "Now." She led me to a small meeting room on the second floor. Just her, me, and that folder. "Do you remember signing an intellectual property transfer agreement 6 weeks ago?" she asked. "Yes." "Do you remember making any changes to that agreement?" I met her eyes. "Yes." She opened the folder and pulled out a copy of the contract. My modification was there in black ink. "From," written clearly above the crossed out, "to." "Walk me through your thinking here," she said, her voice very calm. Too calm. "I read the contract before signing it," I said. "I made a modification. I initialed the change. Then I signed. Graydon and Kellum signed after me, accepting the modification. That makes it a binding contract. You changed the fundamental meaning of the entire document. I changed one word. You reversed the direction of the IP transfer." "Yes." She sat back in her chair, studying me. "Do you understand what you've done?" I signed a contract. So did they. The contract now states that Kellum was transferring intellectual property to you, but Kellum never owned any intellectual property. He never invented anything, which means he signed a document claiming to transfer IP he didn't possess. That's fraud. I said nothing. Every patent application filed under his name in the past 6 weeks, every licensing agreement, every investor presentation, all of it is based on IP he fraudulently claimed to own. IP that, according to this signed contract, he was simultaneously acknowledging belonged to you. I kept my expression blank, confused, like I didn't understand the implications. "The federal government takes IP fraud very seriously," she continued, "especially when venture capital is involved. Kellum has been courting investors, telling them he owns revolutionary water treatment technology. He's taken preliminary investment money, but he doesn't own it. He never did. And this contract proves he knew it." "I just changed one word," I said quietly. She leaned forward. "Did you know what you were doing when you made that change?" I thought about how to answer. The truth was complicated. Yes, I knew I was reversing the transfer. Yes, I knew it would create problems if anyone actually read the document. But did I know it would lead to federal charges? Did I know it would unravel everything Kellum had built in 6 weeks? Did I predict federal marshals and seize documents and fraud investigations? "I knew I was changing the contract," I said finally. "I thought if they read it and still signed it, then that's what they wanted. They didn't read it. That's not my fault." The lawyer stared at me for a long moment. Then she closed the folder. "The company is in a very difficult position. Graydon and Kellum signed a legally binding document that contradicts their subsequent actions. The patent office is involved. The SEC is involved because of the investor money. Our liability, exposure is significant. What do you want from me? We want to know what you want." The question hung there between us. What did I want? My job? My reputation? Money? All of the above? "I want what's mine," I said, "which is the water treatment system, the patents, the recognition for the work I actually did." She nodded slowly. "And if the company agrees to transfer all IP rights to you, will you cooperate with resolving the legal complications? What happens to Kellum? That's between him and federal prosecutors. The company can't control that. And Graydon? He'll be asked to resign." I thought about Graydon in his office that first day, telling me how impressive my work was, then immediately plotting to give it to his son. I thought about every meeting where Kellum took credit for my ideas, every interview where he called himself an innovator, every presentation where he butchered technical concepts I'd spent years developing. "I'll cooperate," I said. The lawyer left. I went back to my workspace. The facility kept operating. Water kept flowing through the systems I'd designed. The treatment process I'd invented kept running, kept saving the company money, kept proving my work was valuable. That weekend, I didn't leave my apartment. I half expected federal agents to show up at my door, but they never came. I half expected the company to fire me, but Monday morning my badge still worked, and my paycheck still deposited. Kellum didn't come back to work. Graydon's office stayed empty. The assistant started packing up his personal items on Tuesday, carefully placing family photos and awards into cardboard boxes. Rumors flew through the facility like wildfire. Graydon was being investigated. Kellum was facing criminal charges. The company was doing damage control with investors. The water treatment patents were in legal limbo. Nobody connected any of it to me. Why would they? I was just the junior engineer who maintained the systems. I kept my head down, did my work, stayed quiet. On Wednesday, the corporate lawyer called me into another meeting. This time, she had 3 other attorneys with her and a stack of documents that looked substantially thicker than the original transfer agreement. "We've prepared a settlement offer," she said. "Full IP rights transfer to you. The company will license the technology from you at agreed-upon rates. We'll handle the patent corrections with the federal office. In exchange, you agree not to sue the company for the attempted theft." I read every word, every clause, every subclause. It took me 3 hours. The attorneys waited. The terms were generous, more than generous. The licensing fees alone would set me up for life. The patents would be entirely mine. My name would replace Kellum's on every application. The company would publicly acknowledge my work. "There's one more thing," the lawyer said, when I finished reading. "Kellum's attorney is claiming the contract. Modification was done after he and Graydon signed. That you changed to from after the fact to frame him for fraud." I looked up from the papers. "That's not true. Can you prove it?" "The contract has 3 signatures. Mine is first, then Graydon's, then Kellum's, all dated the same day. If I'd modified it after they signed, their signatures would have been made before the modification existed. But their signatures are below mine, which means they signed after I made the change. They accepted the modified contract." The lawyer smiled slightly. "That's what our analysis concluded too. But Kellum's attorney is pushing hard on this defense. They're claiming you're some kind of mastermind who manipulated the situation. I just changed one word that might send someone to federal prison. I signed the settlement agreement, all of it, every page. When I left that meeting, I owned something for the first time in my life, really owned it. Not just possession, but legal, documented, federal government recognized ownership. The water treatment system was mine. The patents would be mine. The future royalties would be mine. I went back to work. I checked flow rates. I adjusted chemical feeds. I documented pressure readings. Normal day, normal tasks, except everything had changed. 3 weeks later, Graydon's resignation was announced in a company-wide email. After 22 years of service, he was pursuing other opportunities. The email thanked him for his contributions and wished him well. No mention of investigations. No mention of his son. Just corporate language that said everything by saying nothing. I saw him one more time. He was leaving the building with the last of his personal items, a security guard escorting him to his vehicle. Our paths crossed near the main entrance. He looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time since I'd started working there. "You knew," he said. Not a question, a statement. I changed one word, I replied. "You destroyed my son's future. Your son tried to steal 3 years of my work. I just read the contract before signing it." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more, but the security guard touched his elbow. "Time to go." Graydon walked out of the building, and I never saw him again. The patents were refiled with my name as sole inventor. The process took 4 months of bureaucratic paperwork, but eventually, official documents arrived with federal seals and my name printed in bold text. I kept them in a fireproof safe in my apartment. The facility continued licensing my technology. Every quarter, royalty payments deposited into my account. Not enough to quit working, not at first, but enough to pay off my student loans completely. Enough to start saving real money for the first time in my adult life. Other manufacturing plants started reaching out. They'd heard about the water treatment system. Could they license it too? Could I consult on implementation? Could I design custom variations for their specific needs? I hired an attorney to handle the licensing agreements. Then I hired an accountant to manage the money. 6 months after signing that settlement, I was making more from royalties than from my salary at the plant. But I kept showing up to work. Every day, same schedule, same tasks, because I actually liked the work. I liked seeing the systems operate. I liked solving problems. I liked knowing I'd built something that functioned, that mattered, that saved resources and money, and made industrial processes cleaner. Kellum's criminal trial was set for 9 months after the initial investigation. Federal prosecutors charged him with wire fraud, investor fraud, and intellectual property theft. The case was public record, covered in business journals and legal publications. His attorneys tried everything. They claimed the contract modification was done after the signatures, They claimed I'd manipulated him. They claimed he'd been acting in good faith based on his father's instructions. None of it worked. The forensic document analysis proved the modification happened before the final signatures. The email records proved Kellum knew I'd designed the system. His own presentation materials proved he didn't understand the technology he was claiming to have invented. I was called to testify. I wore a plain suit and answered every question directly. Yes, I designed the water treatment system. Yes, I modified the contract. Yes, I initialed the change before signing. Yes, Graydon and Kellum signed after me. Kellum's attorney tried to make me look like a schemer. Isn't it true you deliberately deceived my client? No. I made a visible change to a legal document and initialed it clearly. Both parties who signed after me accepted that change. You knew they wouldn't read the modification. I don't know what other people read or don't read. I only know what I read. You intended to trap my client. I intended to protect my work. The jury found him guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for 2 months later. I didn't attend that hearing, but the news articles reported he received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to pay restitution to the investors he'd defrauded. Graydon faced civil lawsuits, but no criminal charges. His attorneys argued he'd been trying to protect company IP, not commit fraud. He settled with investors privately. Word through the industry network was that he'd lost most of his retirement savings in the settlements. I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't feel bad either. They'd tried to take everything from me, and there were consequences for that. Real consequences. The facility promoted me to senior engineer 14 months after everything started. My own project team, my own budget, my own office with windows that looked out over the treatment systems I'd designed. I kept improving the technology, new filtration methods, better chemical processes, ways to handle different types of industrial wastewater. Each improvement meant new patents, with my name on them. Each patent meant more licensing opportunities. 2 years after that meeting where Graydon told me to sign or lose everything, I bought a house. Not huge, but mine. 3 bedrooms, a garden where I could grow vegetables, windows in every room that let in natural light. I paid cash. My sister came to visit the week I moved in. We sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while movers brought in furniture. Remember when I was sleeping on your sofa? I said. She laughed. You were so stressed back then, sending out applications every day, never hearing back. I thought I'd wasted all that time in graduate school. All that debt for nothing. Look at you now. I looked around the kitchen, my kitchen, in my house, paid for with royalties from patents bearing my name. It's weird how everything worked out. It's not weird. You're brilliant. You always were. I just read contracts carefully. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe my modesty, but she didn't push it. Work continued. Plants across the region licensed my system. Then plants in other states. Then international facilities. My technology was processing industrial wastewater in 7 countries within 3 years. Every installation generated royalty payments. Every payment went into investments my accountant managed. I quit my job at the original facility 4 years after the settlement, not because I was angry or bitter, but because I had more consulting work than I could handle, while still maintaining a full-time position. The facility manager understood. They kept licensing my technology. We stayed on good terms. I opened my own consulting firm. Small operation. Just me and 2 other engineers I hired to help with installations and training. We worked with manufacturing plants to implement customized water treatment solutions. Business was good, better than good. 5 years after signing that modified contract, I had 11 patents, licensing agreements with 43 facilities across 9 countries, and enough money that I'd never have to worry about rent or debt or losing everything again. I thought about Kellum sometimes. He'd served his prison time and gotten out. I wondered what he was doing, whether he'd learned anything, whether he understood that stealing other people's work had real consequences. Then, 6 years after everything started, I found out. I was traveling for a consulting project in a city 3 hours from where I lived. The installation was taking longer than expected, so I needed to rent a vehicle to get to another client meeting across town. I walked into the rental location, gave my name to the person at the counter, and waited while they processed the paperwork. The employee came back with a key fob and a rental agreement. "Sign here," he said, sliding the paper toward me. I looked up. Kellum. He was wearing a company polo shirt with a name tag. His hair was shorter than I remembered. He looked tired, older than 29, even though that's what he would be now. Prison does that, I'd heard. Ages you in ways that have nothing to do with time. He didn't recognize me. Not at first. I was wearing professional clothes, carrying a leather portfolio, looking nothing like the junior engineer who used to maintain equipment in a plant where his father worked. I picked up the rental agreement and started reading. Every word, every clause. Kellum shifted his weight, waiting. Other customers lined up behind me. "Ma'am, it's just a standard rental contract," he said. "If you're in a hurry, it's the same one everyone signs." I kept reading. Insurance provisions, mileage limits, fuel policies, damage waivers. "Ma'am?" I looked up at him again. Our eyes met. I saw the moment recognition hit. His face went pale. His hand on the counter started shaking slightly. "Bree," he said quietly. "Kellum." The customers behind me were getting impatient. Someone muttered about the wait. Kellum glanced at them, then back at me. "I need to process other customers," he said. "If you don't want to rent the vehicle." I'm still reading. He stood there, trapped. He couldn't leave his post, couldn't refuse to serve me, couldn't do anything except wait while I read every single word of a standard rental agreement that I could have signed in 30 seconds. I took my time. 5 minutes. 10. 15. Finally, I signed at the bottom, pushed the paper back to him. His hand shook when he took it. "Smart move," I said. He flinched, like I'd slapped him. I took the key fob and walked out to find my rental vehicle. A nice sedan, clean, well-maintained. I adjusted the mirrors, connected my phone to the Bluetooth, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see the rental location getting smaller. Somewhere inside, Kellum was probably processing the next customer, handing over keys, explaining insurance options, living the life he'd built after losing everything he'd tried to steal. I drove to my client meeting. We discussed implementing my water treatment system in their facility. They wanted the full installation, the premium package, with ongoing consulting support. The contract was worth more than I used to make in 3 years at the plant. I read every word before signing. That night, in my hotel room, I thought about power, real power, not the kind Graydon had, the kind that comes from a title and a position and knowing the right people. That power was temporary, fragile. One investigation, one legal problem, one son's fraud case, and it evaporated. Real power was different. Real power was owning something nobody could take from you. Patents with your name on them. Knowledge in your head. Skills you'd spent years developing. That power stayed with you. That power grew. I fell asleep thinking about the next project. A new filtration method I'd been developing. Something that could handle pharmaceutical wastewater, which was notoriously difficult to treat. If I could solve that problem, the market would be massive. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story. If you found this worthwhile, please hit that like button and leave a comment sharing your thoughts about what happened. Subscribe if you want to hear more about what happens when people underestimate the quiet ones who actually do the work.